XX con Mike Wallace.
Hey, I got one magazine.
Hoy, en siglo XX,
Your time is up. Leave now or we will force you from power.
la presencia de Estados Unidos en Latinoamérica. Yankee Go Home.
If United States doesn't like our type of democracy, well, that's just too bad.
Estados Unidos y su fuerza militar en Latinoamérica. Soy Mike Wallace y esto es Siglo XX.
Siglo XX con Mike Wallace.
De la tierra de Moctezuma al mar de Panamá, Cuba y otros países en el Caribe, la intervención militar en Latinoamérica ha sido crucial en la política exterior del país. Política oficial desde 1823, cuando el presidente James Monroe formó la doctrina que lleva su nombre. Se tornó más agresiva al iniciarse el siglo XX, cuando Ted Roosevelt definió nuestro papel en el occidente con la memorable frase «habla suave y lleva un garrote». Nuestras tropas han usado ese garrote contra los países vecinos unas 34 veces. Un ejemplo reciente, Haití en el 94.
The drums of war are beating, and even the generals here in Haiti can hear them now. No one doubts any longer that preparations are underway for a massive U.S. invasion to drive out Haiti's military rulers and restore the elected president.
The message of the United States to the Haitian dictators is clear. Your time is up.
El presidente Clinton estaba listo para usar el poder militar para reponer al presidente electo de Haití, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, pero a última hora los generales haitianos facilitaron su retorno. Sin embargo, las tropas estadounidenses llegaron a Haití para hacer cumplir la promesa.
It was a peaceful invasion, but an invasion nonetheless. By week's end, nearly 15,000 American troops had occupied the independent, sovereign nation of Haiti. Yogi Berra would have called it deja vu all over again. The United States, the colossus to the north, had used its overwhelming military and political strength to intervene once again in the affairs of a Caribbean neighbor.
En realidad fue un déjà vu. Después de todo, era la invasión número 34 del siglo a un país latinoamericano. Esto sucede desde que Estados Unidos construyó el Canal de Panamá en 1914.
Because the construction of the Panama Canal was such an enormous technological feat and a great economic investment, U.S. policy towards the whole Caribbean basin changed. Whereas we had been unconcerned about instability in the region in the 19th century, we became almost obsessed with instability after the construction of the canal.
Para proteger el canal y otros intereses en el área, no menos de 5 presidentes estadounidenses han enviado tropas a Nicaragua y a otros países del Caribe que se convirtieron en ejércitos de ocupación.
From 1912 to 1933, the Marines occupied Nicaragua. They ran the banks, railroads, customs houses, and tax collections. That force also trained the Nicaraguan National Guard.
Nicaragua no era la excepción. Otros países del Caribe eran regidos por dictadores llegados al poder con apoyo estadounidense, pero la hegemonía de Washington sobre la región se vio interrumpida en 1959 cuando el cubano Fulgencio Batista fue depuesto por un nuevo tipo de dictador.
Now Batista has fled. A new leader is on the scene, Fidel Castro.
The first week of January 1959, Cuba would be changed forever. A liberator had come.
You come into Havana a conquering hero, like a Caesar.
It was a happy day for everybody, but it was the culmination of something that we had been working for.
Pero no para Estados Unidos, donde vieron a Castro emerger como líder comunista, aliarse a la Unión Soviética y atacar al llamado imperialismo yanqui.
The United States was the owner of our electric power plants, of our telephone companies, of the main transportation companies, of the principal industries, of the best lands, of the largest sugar mills. They owned the Cuban economy.
Pero bajo el ambiente de la Guerra Fría, Estados Unidos no aceptaba a un comunista como líder de un país a solo 140 kilómetros. En marzo de 1960, el presidente Eisenhower autorizó a la CIA a derrocar a Castro, pero fue el presidente Kennedy quien llevó esta política a la acción militar contra el líder.
It was April 17, 1961. Brigade 2506, a group of 1,500 CIA-trained exiles, invaded Castro's Cuba along this beach. Without air cover and U.S. military backup, the Brigade of Exiles was trapped, and within 5 days, most of Brigade 2506 were Fidel Castro's prisoners.
El fracaso estadounidense en Bahía de Cochinos fue un desastre de la política exterior, el cual convenció al líder cubano que Estados Unidos se vengaría de él.
Castro believed then, and believes today, that the U.S. was planning to launch another full-scale invasion against Cuba.
Fue precisamente ese
it was
peligro
precisely that danger,
de una
the danger
invasión directa
of a direct invasion
la que
by the American
condujo
forces that led
a la crisis de
to the missile crisis.
La crisis de los misiles cubanos. Cuando los rusos en 1962 llevaron a Cuba armas nucleares capaces de atacar el centro de Estados Unidos, se produjo un despliegue casi catastrófico entre las dos superpotencias. La amenaza de una conflagración mundial no acabó hasta que el líder soviético Khrushchev accedió a retirar los misiles, pero el gobierno comunista siguió en Cuba. 3 años después, Washington temía que la tendencia se hubiera esparcido a una nación cercana, República Dominicana.
What began as a popular democratic revolution that was committed to democracy and social justice moved into the hands of a band of communist conspirators.
Para aplastar la conspiración, el presidente Lyndon Johnson envió a 42,000 soldados estadounidenses a República Dominicana.
Marines are moving up. They're firing. They're engaged in actual combat with Dominican rebel snipers. No longer is this a purely protective operation. This is battle. Americans are firing against Dominicans, and Dominicans are firing against Americans.
At the year's end, tranquility has not yet been restored. Sporadic fighting still goes on, and the Dominican experience has left a legacy of bitterness.
A pesar de esto, la invasión del 65 llevó a un largo periodo de estabilidad en República Dominicana. Pasaron 18 años antes de enviar tropas estadounidenses a una isla caribeña. Entonces sería un pequeño oasis con una población igual a Cedar Rapids, Iowa. La invasión a Grenada al regreso en siglo XX. En 1979, Fidel Castro y el llamado virus marxista hallaron asidero en Nicaragua, cuando los rebeldes sandinistas llegaron al poder. El mismo año, un partido marxista impuso un excéntrico dictador en la pequeña isla caribeña de Grenada. El presidente Reagan vio estos hechos como los signos de que el comunismo estaba en ascenso en Latinoamérica. Como Kennedy y Johnson antes que él, estaba listo a hacer algo al respecto.
Must we just accept the destabilization of an entire region from the Panama Canal to Mexico on our southern border? Must we sit by while independent nations of this hemisphere are integrated into the most aggressive empire the modern world has seen?
En su discurso de 1983 en sesión conjunta del Congreso, el presidente Reagan sonó la alarma de la supuesta influencia soviética en Centroamérica y advirtió que la influencia comunista había llegado a otro país del Caribe.
On the small island of Grenada, at the southern end of the Caribbean chain, the Cubans, with Soviet financing and backing, are in the process of building an airfield with a 10,000-foot runway. Grenada doesn't even have an air force. Who is it intended for?
El primer ministro de Grenada, Maurice Bishop, negó que el nuevo aeropuerto fuera para sus aliados cubanos y rusos.
Over and over again, we have given assurances on this, and so far as we are concerned, this airport is for strictly civilian and commercial purposes.
Para el momento de la declaración en 1983, Bishop estaba en Estados Unidos buscando mejorar sus relaciones con el gobierno de Reagan sin resultados. De vuelta a Grenada, Bishop pagaría caro su intento de reconciliación.
The leftist military is in control of Grenada this morning. The Prime Minister of the Caribbean island nation, Maurice Bishop, was shot to death last night by soldiers in the People's Revolutionary Army. So were 3 of his cabinet ministers in a showdown at Army headquarters. A round-the-clock curfew is in effect now.
Anyone who seeks to demonstrate or disturb the peace will be shot.
People were just dropping down from that fort with the guns going off, you know.
Al principio se habló de 10 muertos en el golpe de Estado. Meses después fueron hallados en una fosa común más de 100 cadáveres, pero en Estados Unidos la preocupación urgente era una colonia estadounidense en la isla.
There is an American-run medical school in Grenada, and most of the 800 to 1,000 Americans on the island are either students or faculty there. A school official based in this country who's been in constant contact with the school says all the Americans are believed safe.
Really, we're quite shocked that there was this type of bloodshed. But it has not spilled over into the streets in general, and it certainly is not anywhere near the campus where most of the Americans who live on the island are residing now.
Ya corrieran peligro o no, Reagan favoreció la opción de poder ayudarlos.
Pentagon sources say a U.S. Navy task force, including 2,000 Marines, is heading south toward the Caribbean. The ships and Marines left their East Coast ports earlier this week bound for Lebanon, but were given a change of orders out of concern for the safety of the 1,100 Americans on the island of Grenada.
Esta misión tenía la intención de vigilar los hechos, pero la Organización de Estados Occidentales del Caribe pidió la intervención directa de Estados Unidos en Grenada. La Casa Blanca consideraba seriamente esa petición cuando en octubre de 1983 Washington fue estremecido por un desastre militar en el Medio Oriente.
A catastrophic terrorist explosion has killed many United States Marines in Lebanon. A terrorist drove a truck full of explosives up to a 4-story building of battalion headquarters at Beirut Airport, where about 150 or 200 Marines were sleeping, and detonated the explosives. An officer at the scene said, "I haven't seen such carnage since Vietnam."
Mientras el gobierno enfrentaba la muerte de 241 cadetes en Beirut, el destino de los estadounidenses en Grenada tomó gran urgencia. El presidente habló con los líderes del Congreso y le dio el visto bueno a la operación Furia Urgente que envió a 15,000 soldados a Grenada.
We have taken this decisive action for 3 reasons. First, and overriding importance, to protect innocent lives, including up to 1,000 Americans whose personal safety is, of course, my paramount concern. Second, to forestall further chaos. And third, to assist in the restoration of conditions of law and order and of governmental institutions to the island of Grenada.
The battle for Grenada officially began at 5 o'clock Tuesday morning when 400 Marines landed by helicopter at Pearls Airport on the island's east coast. The fighting was light, no Marine casualties. The real battle began a half hour later when 200 Army Rangers parachuted from 500 feet onto the airstrip at Point Salinas. On the ground, American soldiers came under small arms fire, some of it coming from Cubans.
Muchos demócratas en el Congreso criticaron la operación.
This is an act of war and raises genuine questions about whether it is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations, a violation of the Charter of the Organization of American States.
Gunboat diplomacy has a new king. Move over, Teddy Roosevelt.
Ya que la invasión comenzó menos de 48 horas después del bombardeo de Beirut, se produjeron sospechas sobre los motivos del gobierno.
Almost like the United States is trying to find one that they can win. We weren't in Lebanon, we weren't in Central America, so off we go against Grenada.
Pero lo que sucedía en Grenada eran solo especulaciones, ya que los reporteros no pudieron cubrir los 2 primeros días de acción militar por su seguridad, según el Departamento de Defensa. Como resultado, la prensa debió confiar en los anuncios oficiales sobre el éxito de la misión.
Just handed a note, Mr. Secretary, saying that the rescue of the students at the Grand Aunts campus of the medical college is underway, and 6 helicopter loads of students have been evacuated.
Some kissed the ground, some wept, some shouted with joy, and the basic message was the same. It's good to be back in the good old USA. That's the reaction of the students rescued from Grenada, and everyone interviewed agreed they were in danger.
We felt like we were in quite a bit of danger, actually, because there was fire all around us. We could hear helicopters and anti-aircraft guns and machine guns. We didn't know what the heck was going on. We didn't know whose fire was what at this point.
They broke through our door, they kicked it open, and they said, "The American soldiers are here." And we just let out a loud cheer. We were so happy.
3 días después del inicio de la invasión, la prensa pudo entrar al fin en Grenada. Para entonces, gran parte de la lucha había acabado.
Resistance on Grenada today had all but ceased, and by tonight, American forces had captured the leaders of the coup that triggered the invasion. Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Cord taken yesterday, and a man claiming to be General Hudson Austin today. The Pentagon now puts the U.S. casualty toll at 16 dead, 77 wounded, and 3 missing.
All the administration's proclaimed objectives have been accomplished this past week. American medical students are safe. An unpopular Marxist government has been overthrown. Cuba has lost an ally. Officers here say it worked, this invasion, because of numbers, that's all. A task force of 15,000 to take an island of less than 110,000 residents. If a larger force has ever been assembled for a smaller objective, no one here can remember when that might have been.
Al menos por encima, no había duda de que la breve misión en Grenada era un éxito militar, pero una vez terminada se produjeron dudas, en especial sobre los estudiantes de medicina. ¿Acaso corrían tanto peligro como se dijo en la Casa Blanca?
They were actually thanking President Reagan for saving them after the intervention occurred, for helping them out of a terrible war-like situation that had occurred as a result of the intervention. The truth, however, was that prior to the intervention, the students and their parents had petitioned the administration not to intervene, saying that they were safe and secure, and that an intervention might very well create a terrible problem for them, as in fact it did.
Pero la rápida intervención también creó un problema para la milicia estadounidense. Por lo rápido de la misión, las tropas no tenían información de inteligencia sobre la isla. Esta falta de información pudo haber expuesto a las tropas a riesgos innecesarios y pudo haber contribuido a la muerte de los 19 estadounidenses en Grenada.
Is it the case that we had no intelligence resources on the ground in Grenada?
Yes, it is. It was a startling admission by National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane. Until the 3rd week of October, Grenada was a low-priority intelligence target. We're told that at the most, 2 agents were on the island at any one time. One intelligence official said there were more important places for our resources than this pipsqueak island. By contrast, 7 months ago, President Reagan made Grenada sound like an area of immediate concern.
It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
I've been told by people involved in that invasion that when our troops landed, they had no idea where they were or where they were supposed to go. They had very poor intelligence. They had to go to gasoline stations and ask for maps of the island.
Este mal pudo haber llevado a una serie de errores que produjeron muchas muertes, tanto militares como civiles.
The Pentagon now acknowledges at least 12 persons killed when a Navy jet attacked a hospital in the capital of St. George's. The attack came on the first day of the invasion. A team of SEALs, the Navy's elite commando unit, was trapped while trying to rescue the island's Governor General, Sir Paul Scoon, from his home. Artillery fire was coming from the direction of the hospital, so the Americans called in an airstrike. At the time, the Pentagon says, no one knew it was a hospital.
De hecho, la confusión, el hastío y la poca información produjeron quizás las bajas estadounidenses.
Pentagon officials also say most of the 18 American deaths during the invasion of the island resulted from accidents. 4 members of the Navy's elite SEALs Commando Unit drowned in a pre-invasion accident. The Washington Post this morning reports several Army Rangers were killed and others wounded in a collision of 2 helicopters.
Además, las tropas invasoras en Grenada no tenían idea de la resistencia que encontrarían tras desembarcar.
The Cubans surprised Americans with heavy gunfire. The Americans came back with Navy jet fire, strafing the Cubans. Several dozen Cubans were killed and captured, and only then did they give up.
We didn't anticipate meeting Cuban fighting units. We knew there were Cuban construction workers in there who might have been reservists.
Pero los cubanos dijeron que la lucha pudo evitarse por completo.
The Cuban interest section in Washington released excerpts from cables allegedly sent from Havana to Grenada. Their message: had the U.S. concerned itself only with the safety of its citizens, there would have been no fighting between Americans and Cubans. A cable purportedly sent by Fidel Castro on the Saturday before the invasion directs the Cubans on the island to fire only if fired upon and not to interfere with attempts to evacuate American students.
Cuando el tiroteo empezó, Castro ordenó a sus 700 soldados en Grenada que lucharan hasta el fin.
Last night, at a midnight news conference, Cuban President Fidel Castro was asked why he had not sent reinforcements to Grenada.
It was impossible because the U.S. squadron and aircraft carriers were moving that direction. We had no transportation means.
Castro called the United States invasion of Grenada an unjustifiable error that would create resentment against the U.S.
Casi olvidada en toda la polémica estuvo la preocupación original de Ronald Reagan cuando advirtió al pueblo estadounidense sobre el auge comunista en Grenada, bajo el primer ministro Maurice Bishop.
Remember the airport controversy in Grenada? Bishop, along with the Cubans, was building a new international airport that he said could handle those big jumbo jets full of tourists. But President Reagan said the design and purpose were military. Well, here we are about a year later, and Grenada still doesn't have an air force, but this airport is being rushed to completion pretty much to the same scale as before. The major difference is this. Instead of Cuba doing most of the financing and supervising the construction, that's now being done by the United States. And America now says this airport is necessary for the growth of tourism here, which is what Grenada said all along.
A pesar de la ironía de que los contribuyentes estadounidenses financiaran un aeropuerto comenzado por los comunistas cubanos, lo que Reagan había dicho sucedió.
Signs of the transformation, the Reagan counter-revolution, are everywhere, and not just in Grenada. The Second Fleet delivered a strong and simple message last year. It read, "America is carrying a big stick again and is prepared to use it." It's no accident that now, 1 year later, conservative governments, Ronald Reagan's friends in the Caribbean, are stronger than ever, and that left-wing movements are shattered and splintered.
1 year ago, we liberated Grenada from communist thugs who had taken over that country. It was a second American revolution, and it's only just begun. America is back.
Reagan recibió críticas de ser extravagante. Después de todo, decían, Grenada no era digna de las inversiones del país. No habría mucha diferencia 6 años después cuando Bush desató el poder militar contra Panamá. La historia de la operación causa justa al regreso en siglo XX. Por muchos años, Panamá estuvo bajo la llamada mano pesada de Estados Unidos. No fue sorpresa cuando los panameños explotaron de orgullo nacional en el 77, cuando su presidente, el general Omar Torrijos, negoció la entrega del Canal de Panamá para finales del siglo XX. Como héroe nacional, Torrijos murió en un accidente de avión en 1981. Su sucesor, el general Manuel Noriega, era más polémico. De hecho, Noriega y su fama de narcotraficante era tal durante los años 80 que el país pensó que no podía seguir allí.
2 separate U.S. federal indictments reported tonight against Panama's military strongman, General Manuel Noriega. Criminal charges of cocaine trafficking and more.
Justice Department sources say the indictments charge that General Noriega virtually turned the government of Panama into a criminal enterprise and made millions from the Colombian drug cartel.
Por su parte, Noriega negó los cargos.
General Noriega, have you yourself never profited from the transshipment of drugs from Colombia to Panama to the United States?
Nunca.
Never.
Nunca.
Never.
Nunca.
Never.
Question. How much do you make? What's your salary?
¿Cuál es tu salario?
Hard question. Simple question.
¿Difícil o sencillo?
No, sencillo. Pero la pregunta.
Time.
You want time?
Break. Sí, break. Break.
Look, you say break. It is my understanding that you make about $50,000 a year in your job. But you have several homes here in Panama, home in Paris, fabulous art collection. You are said to be worth $400 million. I don't know. Your supporters laugh at that. You're a very wealthy man. Where does all the money come from, General Noriega? Your money.
Bueno, todo eso es falso.
It's all false.
Para 1989, el gobierno de Bush esperaba que las elecciones presidenciales de ese año diera a los panameños oportunidad de rechazar al candidato de Noriega. El general accedió a aceptar un equipo internacional que vigilara las elecciones, pero cuando Noriega comenzó a dudar, Robert Pastor fue enviado a Panamá a confirmar el acuerdo.
The negotiations I had with General Noriega were some of the most bizarre that I've ever had with a foreign leader. He was drunk. He was angry. At one moment in the negotiations, he jumped up on a table and began throwing things at me. I had to put up with all of that in order to try to secure just one objective. And that objective was to permit us to send in an international monitoring team led by former Presidents Carter and Ford. And he agreed to that.
Las vigiladas elecciones permitieron un gran cambio. El pueblo panameño votó en contra del candidato de Noriega. Al menos así parecía.
The people won. We won. The Ado Civilista won by a vote of 70 or 75% of the voters.
There's no doubt the people voted overwhelmingly for democracy. Whether or not their votes will be counted accurately still remains to be seen.
2 days after the polls closed, the first results finally announced on national TV. General Noriega's candidates winning by a margin of 2-1. There's nothing we can do about it because they have the guns, said this man.
Los partidarios de Noriega no intentaron ocultar lo que habían hecho.
If United States doesn't like our type of democracy, well, that's just too bad.
Los perdedores oficiales tomaron las calles el 10 de mayo para protestar el supuesto robo de Noriega en las elecciones. Las protestas provocaron una fiera resistencia de los leales al general.
The brutal attack came as the opposition candidates were leading a demonstration through the streets when they were confronted by this group of thugs. Their T-shirts read Dignity Battalion. They are, in effect, Noriega's militia. They break through, threatening violence. Shouting, "You're going to die here," they start swinging. Watch closely. At least a dozen of Panama's riot police are standing by, making no effort to interfere with the attacking mob. The most vicious attack, the beating and arrest of opposition candidate Billy Ford, was captured by cameras from around the world. Again, it is clear, Panamanian riot police are standing by, doing nothing to interfere with the attackers.
El ataque enfureció a George Bush, quien tenía 4 meses en el gobierno.
You cannot have an election that is blatantly stolen, where people that win are beaten up by thugs.
The president also called on Noriega's own soldiers to desert his cause.
But we'd love to see him get him out. We'd like to see him out of there.
Con ese fin, Estados Unidos apoyó un golpe fallido contra Noriega 5 meses después. Basado en ese fracaso, Noriega recrudeció el acoso a los estadounidenses en Panamá. Ese acoso selló su destino.
U.S. officials are calling it the worst U.S.-Panamanian confrontation in 25 years. American soldiers are in battle gear tonight, guarding U.S. bases in Panama after one officer was killed last night and a second was wounded by General Manuel Noriega's troops.
According to the U.S. Southern Command, the American officer who died at Gorgas Military Hospital was shot when he tried to escape from an angry mob after he and others mistakenly strayed into the area near General Noriega's headquarters.
The latest round of confrontation comes on the heels of General Noriega's elevation to head of state by his handpicked assembly, officially investing him with absolute powers. He declared that a state of war exists with the United States.
I think this pressure reached the point that President Bush found himself in a position where he could not but go ahead with an invasion. Otherwise, he would be embarrassed.
3 días después de la muerte del soldado americano, Estados Unidos respondió.
More than 20,000 U.S. soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors launched their attack in the early morning darkness. They were backed by swarms of helicopters, ships, and planes.
General Noriega's reckless threats and attacks upon Americans in Panama created an imminent danger to the 35,000 American citizens in Panama. As president, I have no higher obligation than to safeguard the lives of American citizens.
El principal objetivo de la operación Causa Justa era capturar al general Noriega para someterlo a juicio en Miami por cargos de narcotráfico. De hecho, fue un arresto por drogas de parte de la milicia.
This is what life was like on just one street corner in Panama City today. A squad of American soldiers and some luckless Panamanian civilians pinned down for hours by mortars, rocket grenades, and bullets. A warehouse down the street explodes in flames. Some of Manuel Noriega's die-hard loyalists have turned into urban guerrillas, and this is the result. They haven't found Noriega himself yet, but they have found thousands of weapons, stashes of money and cocaine, and evidence that Noriega apparently practiced voodoo blood rituals.
Tomó menos de un día para que la milicia controlara la situación.
The Pentagon says all organized resistance from Panamanian defense forces has ended, but the news is not all good. American casualties are now put at 15 dead and 59 wounded.
Y la pérdida de vidas civiles en la invasión a Panamá, daños colaterales, según el eufemismo del Pentágono, se estimaba entre unas 500 y posiblemente 2,000 personas.
Houses and businesses in the city have been destroyed during the fighting. Large numbers of Panamanians have been made homeless, and for them, the U.S. Army has provided makeshift shelters. Looting is reported out of control in some sections of the capital. Casualty figures are mounting daily. The economy, already weak before the invasion, is now all but destroyed.
Sin embargo, las tropas no hallaban a Noriega, a pesar de la recompensa de $1 millón por él.
After 4 days of looking, now we finally know where Manuel Noriega is. Here, at the papal nuncios in Panama City. Diplomatically speaking, foreign soil belonging to the Vatican.
The United States has moved these trucks into driveways near the back to block any possible fast escape. They've shut out the street lights so there's no light at night, moved in tanks as part of roadblocks such as this one, just a few yards from where Noriega is being held. And over here, interestingly enough, a speaker system through which statements by President Bush and rock music are being pumped out on a 24-hour-a-day basis as part of the psychological pressure that the United States wants to keep drumming into Noriega inside that compound.
Finalmente, tras 10 días de ruido y negociaciones, el máximo líder de Panamá se rindió ante los funcionarios estadounidenses.
The motorcade bearing Noriega zoomed into the federal courthouse in Miami early this morning. Late today, the former dictator, still sporting his uniform and looking solemn, was finally arraigned. U.S. officials said they made no deal, agreed to drop no charges in exchange for his surrender. So if convicted, Noriega could spend the rest of his life in jail.
En el 92, Noriega fue sentenciado a 40 años de prisión, condenado por 8 cargos de narcotráfico y extorsión. Pero no serían las drogas la causa de la siguiente intervención en Latinoamérica, sino los resultados de un hecho bastante extraño, una elección libre en Haití. Esa historia al regreso en siglo XX. Haití fue el segundo país independiente del Nuevo Mundo detrás de Estados Unidos. Pero a diferencia de este último, Haití tiene una historia represiva y violenta. La caída de los Duvalier, dictadores de Haití a mediados de los 80, le dio sus primeras elecciones que llevaron al católico radical Jean-Bertrand Aristide a la presidencia. Pero tras 7 meses de ser electo, Aristide fue depuesto por la milicia haitiana en el golpe de 1991, golpe que llevó a los haitianos a escapar con rumbo fijo a los Estados Unidos.
What to do about a nation at sea, one so close to these shores that even little boats crammed and leaking can bring its people here, and have many times. Haiti seems only to have known trouble and poverty and grief. Haitians had reason to hope that their new president might bring change at last, and then their new president was ousted.
Fue depuesto y reemplazado por una dictadura militar que aplastó a sus opositores.
The beleaguered main hospital in Port-au-Prince was struggling to cope today with a growing number of victims of the random violence. No one knows how many people have been killed and wounded, but this ward alone was jammed with some 50 gunshot victims.
Para 1992, unos 32,000 haitianos trataban de huir de la isla en bote solo para ser devueltos por los guardacostas estadounidenses. El presidente Bush dijo que el país solo podía dar entrada selectiva.
The Statue of Liberty still stands, and we still open our arms under our law to people that are politically oppressed. But we are not bound to have an open policy where everybody in economic deprivation around the world can come to the United States.
En cambio, Bill Clinton, el opositor de Bush en la campaña electoral de 1992, favorecía un enfoque más generoso.
I think they are political refugees. My own view is that we should keep the refugees here until we can restore democracy to Haiti and restore the duly elected government there.
Sin embargo, una vez electo presidente, Clinton cambió de parecer.
The Clinton administration's first foreign policy move was to impose a naval blockade around Haiti. It has worked in the sense that it has stopped the flow of refugees, but nobody believes it has solved the problem.
El problema era que los refugiados no tenían a dónde ir. Esto produjo protestas de los haitianos estadounidenses y sus aliados en Washington.
We have gotten a rather strange mixture of incompetence and neglect and cynicism.
Does anyone believe that were these refugees white, that we would be scooping them out of the ocean like so much pond scum, throwing them back into the killing fields of this place? Does anyone believe that? Of course not.
Randall Robinson, importante opositor de la política de Clinton para Haití, comenzó una huelga de hambre. Era solo el principio.
3 members of Congress were arrested today when they staged a protest outside the White House. They're supporting activist Randall Robinson in the 24th day of his hunger strike.
When all this killing started, when it became obvious.
3 días más tarde, Clinton suavizó su política y permitió que algunos haitianos fueran admitidos en Estados Unidos por razones políticas. Robinson acabó con la huelga.
I wanted the policy changed, and the policy has changed. The point is that people fleeing for safety will get hearings.
Pero mientras el gobierno suavizaba su política, la violencia proseguía en Haití y muchos creían que era instigada por los militares.
As General Cedras sees it, the military saved Haiti from a radical threat when it overthrew this man, President Aristide.
Under any circumstances, do you see President Aristide returning to this country to resume power?
Nous ne pouvons pas. We cannot run the risk in this country to expose ourselves to a populist power.
And so the populist power, President Aristide, remains stranded in Washington, where he has managed to mobilize an influential network of congressional backers and President Clinton.
I want to welcome President Aristide back to the White House.
Bajo una enorme presión de Washington, el general Cedras se reunió con Aristide en la isla de gobernadores de la Bahía de Nueva York en 1993. Luego acordarían el retiro de la Junta Militar. El primer paso fue en octubre con la llegada de un grupo de observadores a Haití. Su llegada debía coincidir con la renuncia del general Cedras, pero no sucedió. En su lugar, el grupo se encontró con una sorpresa.
Gangs of Haitian gunmen kept the first shipload of U.S. peacekeepers from coming ashore today. They roughed up Americans at the port.
They all had weapons, and they start screaming, and they attacked the car where Charge d'Affaires was, and then they turned on us and they attacked us.
To everyone's surprise, a day later, the White House aborted the mission. Washington was fearful that American soldiers might be attacked and killed if the Harlan County tried to dock.
Just think about it. Here we are, the most powerful military nation on earth. No one can even remotely challenge us. And a ragtag bunch of thugs, less than 100 of them, turns back a United States ship.
Para septiembre de 1994, Clinton estaba molesto y, apoyado por una resolución de la ONU, amenazó con invadir Haití.
The message of the United States to the Haitian dictators is clear. Your time is up. Leave now, or we will force you from power.
President Clinton says you must go.
Le président Clinton a dit que vous devez partir.
Your time is finished.
Votre temps est terminé.
You know that out there is a great American invasion force.
Vous savez que dehors, il y a une grosse force d'intervention américaine.
Are you prepared to go?
Est-ce que vous êtes prêt à partir?
Je suis de préférence préparé à lutter avec mon peuple.
I'm rather prepared to fight with my people.
The aircraft carrier America, the ship that will carry part of the assault force for next week's planned invasion of Haiti, left Norfolk today, bound for the Caribbean. One day behind the America, the Eisenhower, carrying helicopters and infantry that will go into Haiti after the initial assault.
Al continuar esta muestra estadounidense, los líderes militares haitianos seguían en desafío. Finalmente, cuando la invasión era inminente, Clinton accedió a enviar al expresidente Jimmy Carter a Haití en un último esfuerzo por lograr una solución pacífica. El equipo de Carter incluía al general Colin Powell, el senador Sam Nunn y el asistente Robert Pastor.
President Clinton had given us instructions to arrive in Haiti at noon on Saturday, and in 24 hours to secure agreement from the Haitian military to get them to withdraw from power and to permit Aristide to return. This is quite a challenge in 24 hours.
The Carter delegation has been under pressure from Washington, quote unquote, since about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to leave Haiti, but the former President Carter has insisted on staying.
And I remember very vividly when President Clinton said very forcefully, President Carter, Senator Nunn, General Powell, I want you out of that country right now. You're to leave right now.
I told President Carter, I said, this is uncomfortable for me. We've been friends a long time. I'm going to have to order you out of there in 30 more minutes. You've got to get out.
Pero Carter convenció a Clinton de que estaba cerca de lograr un acuerdo para asegurar unas horas más de negociaciones. El problema era que la orden para la invasión ya estaba firmada y el primer avión C-130 había salido a Haití desde el fuerte Bragg a las 6:47 p.m.
There had never been a plan to have them talking while American planes were flying.
Some of the Haitians around General Cedras and the others were then beginning to grumble, saying things like, this has been a double cross. This Carter thing was all just a ploy to set up the invasion.
Pero la amenaza de invasión fue suficiente para persuadir al general Cedras de retirarse y la lucha fue abortada.
He said, very quickly to summarize my answer, we will take peace instead of war. I will sign this agreement.
Sin embargo, las fuerzas estadounidenses llegaron a Haití para asegurar el acuerdo. Aristide fue repuesto en su cargo.
We will move from violence to non-violence.
People danced down the streets. They chanted Aristide, the same way other people chanted Mandela not that long ago, a couple of continents away.
El primer trabajo de las tropas estadounidenses era el de desarmar a los terroristas responsables de gran parte de la matanza en Haití. Además, debían evitar que los haitianos clamaran venganza, especialmente cuando una celebración a favor de Aristide se tornó violenta.
A grenade exploded in the middle of the march. Instance later, the street was littered with the dead, the dying, and the wounded. The demonstration was drenched in blood and tears. Anyone the crowd didn't recognize as a friend was in very serious trouble. One man was identified as an attaché. He was pummeled by the mob. They would have killed him. They were close to killing him. But U.S. troops moved in and saved his life. He was handcuffed and held down by an American boot. Another American helped a wounded man, consoled him, assured him ambulances were on the way. But before they could get there, Humvee started evacuating the injured.
De hecho, muchos de los más fieros críticos haitianos se sorprendieron por el comportamiento humanitario de los soldados.
The U.S. troops have really changed my mind. I expected brutality, a lot of brutality from them, bombing, killing, and instead they have shown great humanity toward the people. And it's amazing, they have won the heart of most of the people here.
Algunas reflexiones finales al regreso en siglo XX. En los dos primeros siglos de historia en nuestro país hubo frecuentes y dramáticos cambios en nuestra política exterior. Tomemos el giro de 180 grados que nuestra política tomó hacia Rusia. Amigos en la Segunda Guerra, implacables enemigos en la Guerra Fría y de nuevo aliados. Pero en todos los cambios ha habido una constante: la enmienda tácita de Estados Unidos en la doctrina Monroe, que le da derecho a intervenir en Latinoamérica cada vez que quiera. Nadie puede predecir el futuro de la política exterior estadounidense, pero si el pasado nos guía, la constante que continuará así es el creciente interés interno en sus vecinos del sur. Soy Mike Wallace y esto es Siglo XX.